welcome to another episode of Gaming at the Round Table. I'm Crystal with Maverick and JoJo.
Hello.
Today we are going to talk about live services and where we think they're going to go in the future, if there is a future. I'm going to ask you guys what you guys think is happening in the industry now, or how do you feel about what's happening in the industry right now? One of the examples that I know that I can bring up is a game that's apparently shutting down today, and that's what, Concord?
Mm-hmm.
Sony's Concord, yeah.
Yes. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I'm going to let him go first on it.
Okay. It clearly didn't have good market research in the PR or advertising department. So I think there's a lot to talk about with Concord. But I think the part that I would mainly try to focus on that's less debatable, because people feel very strongly about everything from wokeism to just money laundering, theory crafting, right? Like, you could go all sorts of places with this, but I think that something that's very hard to argue is the notion that they very clearly did not do due diligence or proper process of market research. They released a very expensive game and the market wasn't there. And it wasn't even close, right? It's one thing to expect, 200,000 people and you only get 100,000. They were getting in the double digits.
At one point was like their top end.
Right. And I remember several days ago when I read it, it was like 60 players for the day or consecutive or something like that. Right. And we're talking about a live service game. Live service, you need thousands if you want to survive, and preferably growing, right? So how can you get a game that can flunk in 2 weeks with a ton of... And it wasn't like the game had tons of bugs, right? All the reports I was reading, they were very opinionated things, but it wasn't, this was a hot piece of garbage that didn't work. It was a hot piece of garbage that we don't like. And I feel like that is just a clear sign of failure in research. How can you release a game that nobody likes? And it's not a pet project too, right? We're an indie company. We have to give a little bit of buffer for people to be like, express your creative freedom and all this other stuff. Crystal's voiced this before. It wasn't creative freedom, right? They weren't breaking boundaries. They were copying and pasting other aspects of the genre. So it's, how do you spend $200 million and not a good chunk of it go into making sure people want this?
I don't understand that at all. It's a lot of money.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around because they had a beta period, which now that's the standard. But how do you go from that information gathering session and just completely blank it? From what I've heard, and I don't know if it was a true fact or not, and that's why I'm saying I think it's a rumor, but that it took them over 8 years to get this game out. So how do you take that drastic of a time frame and completely just keep throwing dirt on something or keep digging a hole and just not get any feedback and think like, hey, no. The community looked at it, played the beta, and just washed their hands of it, which I haven't seen a game do that since before live services was kind of a thing. Like, there was a couple games that came out that were just complete duds or flops. But again, it was a time period where you got a game and it wasn't connected to anything, and it was either good or it just wasn't your type of game, or it was just really, really bad.
Yeah.
Did something like what you're describing, did that happen to... I was so excited. Not Apex, not Destiny.
Overwatch?
No, it's a game that didn't do well. It was a sci-fi shooter... And it was beautiful looking at the time.
Destiny?
No, it was similar to Destiny in vibe.
Oh, it starts with an A.
I feel like it does start with an A. And this could be a really good example. I was so excited about this game.
The robot one.
You had like a jetpack, you had a gun. This describes a lot of games, but... I need to Google this because I really want to. Failed. Anthem.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it was a robot. Like, you were in an armor suit.
Kicked in. Yeah,
I got the
Anthem, I
first
feel
letter.
like fell in that category. People were very excited about it in terms of the previews. I guess this isn't really what you were saying, because you were saying like they played it in the beta and then they were like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
forget
mean
about it.
they seemed to wash their hands before it ever came back out. Anthem, I think, had enough hype, and even in a demo, was somewhat like, oh, this is to get my curiosity going.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you played it, it was their game loop wasn't very good. I think is their issue, or that it was too compacted. So where it was like, it felt like you were rewashing way too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Where in some games you get the end game and then you kind of, do I play it again? Do I play a different class or something like that? Where that one kind of like couple missions into the game, you're like, I'm taking off, I'm flying, I'm going back, I'm taking off, I'm flying. Like that loop got really repetitive, really, really fast.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a big difference. I can't tell you personally anything about Concord other than the name.
Yeah, that's a good
No.
disparity between the two, right? And I know we're going to get back to live service in particular, but how did it fail? I think is important to the discussion, not just that it was a live service, because this may transcend this particular game. And so you mentioned that you hadn't heard of it. Crystal earlier today said the exact same thing, and I said the same thing until I heard news about this hot
It's
garbage
failing. Yeah.
stuff titles. I hadn't really ever heard of Concord until it was already gaining the this game is trash, and then they shut it down, right? Like there was a 2 week span, but prior to that, unlike Anthem, I don't remember reading about it in upcoming articles and stuff like that. And
No.
it just didn't have that pull, which is weird because it's a Sony game that took years and $200 million.
I mean,
Why
in all
wouldn't they
fairness, I play on
advertise it?
Xbox, so that's why I didn't.
Yeah.
Uh,
I didn't see anything on it. Like I didn't even
Well,
see like a tab show up. I saw nothing.
now that you mention that, we check the PlayStation Store frequently.
daily. Now,
And
granted, we
there's,
don't go through the entire catalog, right? But we see it daily.
I don't recall seeing anything, or maybe it just didn't stand out.
Yeah, which is an advertising problem.
Yeah.
But then you
Ooh.
have to wonder, did they kind of think it was going to be a dud and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't talk too much about it?
But I mean,
Hopefully
if
it does
you've put
well.
that much money in it, why would you add to the pile of burning? I guess why not
Well,
kind of
that,
try to like,
It's very sus.
yeah, it goes back to what I mentioned about money laundering. Like, a lot of people are talking about it like, how could they do this epic failure? But I feel like, ironically, when you start getting into, what do they call those tinfoil hat people?
Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories. If you start thinking about it from someone was stealing a bunch of the money, like the profits weren't going to the devs, they were a lot of the, like, let's say 50 million went to like CEOs and stuff like that,
mm-hmm.
or upper managers. If you look at it like that, or even criminal, like they're doing something illegal or they're shuffling the appearance of money, whatever, it actually makes way more sense than how did Sony put this much time and this much money into something with very little advertising, very little market research, and tremendously low performance. How does that happen at such a huge scale? It's almost mind boggling, right? When you think of it.
Especially,
Sorry, go ahead.
especially when you start thinking of it compared to other live service games,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what really runs the current live service industry is the current OG games, you know, like Overwatch, Apex, Call of Duty, Genshin Impact.
So you bring up a good point, right? The industry, is live service healthy for the industry in general? I think that's a big topic, but I will say something that did finally happen in the gaming industry that is healthy is that as consumers, we've gotten accustomed to live service, regardless of whether that was good or bad to begin with. We're now used to it. And so now there are bars with which we hold that standard, right? So if you're going to make an FPS and you're going to release it as a live service, which is scary because of surveys I'll mention in a second, you now have to match the Fortnites, the Apexes, the what's the sci-fi one that's out currently?
First Descendant.
Yeah, that's a good example too. You have to match all of these, the Warframe even.
Valorant, yeah.
Valorant, thank you. That was the one I was actually thinking of. These are bars in which the industry needs to meet or exceed. And if you don't, you better be so different, like No Man's Sky or something like that. Failed epically on release, but it survived. It survived because it was, in my opinion, different enough that the industry was like, we want to see what you do when you don't give us this garbage, right? Like, try again. We're interested. But with Concord, they played it safe in terms of mechanics in the genre. So you better make it really good or really appealing in some fashion. Something has to make it worth comparing against the existent powerhouses, to your point, Crystal. And it's not just FPS, right? You mentioned Genshin. Wuwa came into the scene, Wuthering Waves. Excellent, because they took the model that was there and they improved upon it. Blue Protocol was a game that I was personally really looking forward to. Super excited about an anime MMO light gotcha game similar to the prior two, and I recently found out that they canceled development. Now, this game had alphas and betas, and I thought it looked beautiful and very fun, but I guess they felt like we're not going to be able to compete in the market, and so they pulled the cord, which apparently Concord should have done. But yeah, so to get back to my original point, sorry there, is that we, as a gaming industry, what is healthy is that now that we've had to deal with all this type of predatory stuff, at least now we have bars. You have to be this tall or higher to ride the ride of my wallet, right? Like, otherwise, you're just not my time. You're not worth my time.
I was worried for a long time that games were all going to become like this.
That mentions one of the surveys. So I have a survey. I didn't do it. Survey 95%. This is from xcomputer.com. I don't know where they got the survey from. February 4th, 2024, they said, survey 95% of game studios have live service titles planned for the future. Now, that's out of 537 global studios that were part of the survey. Only 5 reported not looking to make a live title in the future. Now, I don't know if that includes every single heavy hitter. I would imagine it does out of 537. But that's a huge chunk. Even if there were 537 indie, which is crazy. But like, no matter what hundreds of companies that were, that's too many not to agree that there's clearly a trend to make live service video games.
Yeah.
But in a different, more recent survey, 70% of developers, the people making these games, are concerned about the sustainability of live service games. And I think it's very healthy for the consumers that developers are worried about the sustainability. You know, it'd be easy to sustain a good quality game.
Yeah. But a lot of the live service games are free to play. So is it really good for the consumer?
No. But the fact that now the big industries are seeing catastrophic failures, CEOs and upper management personalities are going to be less likely to just say, get it out the door. You know, they all make money. They don't all make money. And some of them apparently lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. It's like the whole argument for capitalism, right? The free market type thing. If you can do it better than your competitors are going to falter. And so if they want to compete in the market, they need to make a better product or something that's more appealing so that people spend the money.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about some titles that I think aren't, like, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're not. You have Wukong that just came out, which is a global smash.
Yep.
If you look at it rating wise, that's not live service, from what I understand. The Souls games are not. And again, those games are very, very popular.
Do you want a definition for live service that we can all agree on?
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to say, like, if you're comparing, I think Diablo's live service.
Yeah. So let's just set the de facto. I think it's safe enough to say a live service game is one that is designed to have frequent, recurring releases of content and in-game transactions, or cash shop
But do
basically.
you have to be able to play? Do you have to be online to be able to play the game for it to be considered live service?
I personally would say no. However, I would very much also struggle to give examples where that's not the case.
Because that's where my brain is kind of saying, like, because I'm currently reviewing the newest Star Wars game. That is a solo open world game where you're not online. And for me, I actually enjoy the fact that I don't have to constantly, like, I think you do have to connect to Ubisoft's service,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that would make it a live service game, but you don't have to connect to a server to play the game.
Well, let's define live service not as live on the internet, but like, are you expecting a content patch every 2 weeks or every month? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not a live service
I
game.
know it has a battle pass, but I haven't looked into it, so I think that would make it fall into that.
Hmm. I feel like a battle pass might not be enough on its own.
Well, usually with battle passes means like new content will come with it, no? Because why else
Usually,
No,
would
Diablo
but
has
if
a
it's
battle
battle
just
pass?
pass with.
cosmetics, oh, now we're getting into the weeds.
That's why I was like, this line is kind of like the
Clip
goalpost is
time.
moving.
Do you guys think? Just ask the audience. If we don't know, maybe they do.
What would you guys consider to be live service in this current age of gaming?
It
That's
seems
probably the
simple
best. Yeah,
until
like
people start responding to you, and you're like, oh. All right. Sorry to throw you off there.
no, it's that's why I brought it up because for me, I'm trying to like pinpoint games that I could say are this is doing it right, this is doing it wrong. But if it's not, I
It
could say like
says,
Wukong is an amazing game that's not live service, and I'm 90% sure that it's not live service. It's a single player action role playing game.
It's not live service.
So like that game out of the park, smashing like numbers, and then you have other games that are coming out that aren't going to be online, which I'm happy about.
this says, what counts as a live service game?
Ooh,
Also known as living games or games as a service, there are a few ways to define a live service game.
sounds
These
like
games
AI.
are typically based upon some form of online multiplayer built around the idea of constant evolution over time through the release of additional content and updates.
Yeah, that
So,
constant updates, I think, is
yeah,
really what makes something live service. They tend to be multiplayer. They tend to have battle passes and cash shops, but I think to make it truly live service, from my perspective, it needs to have that recurring content
yeah,
changing, changing or outright updating new. That sounds like the same thing. It's not. So when I say new content, I mean like a new map, new characters,
yeah,
new things. Not necessarily the way the game plays. However, on that point, Diablo tends to do that via changing via seasons, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
don't get really much different in terms of maps and players. It's more like the way the game works changes. It's very common in first person shooters, right? Apex and Fortnite and
eh,
basically every major FPS.
I don't know that this is drastic, but it is there because they have the new season patches which can adjust a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas Diablo's seasons are added story takes inside of what they currently have. Where I think in October they're going to have their first new full on expansion, which that's rare to say these days. It's like, oh, they're getting an expansion pack.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
yeah.
hear that in a game, you're like, expansion. I'm pretty sure if you ask most kids these days, if you go, do you know what an expansion pack is? They probably say no. Like,
We should totally do that as a science experiment. I'm
I'll ask.
very interested. Ask your kids. Let me know what happens. Because
I'm pretty sure they don't know what it is.
half of me is like, nah, they'll say something close. But then the more I think about it, I was like, how would they know?
What
They'd
they
have to
would
be like
say,
hardcore gamers to begin
I
with.
feel like, is DLC.
And they would consider that like an expansion.
Yeah, because technically, for instance, Pokemon, the last Pokemon game that came out, had an expansion where an extra area can be bought with different Pokemon and everything like that. But I feel like a lot of people would claim that that's extra DLC.
Well, yeah, added characters, added worlds, I think counts as, because that's part of Diablo's thing is they'd give you a new character, and then that new character had completely new mechanics. So I
Yeah, I
think that
mean,
added to whatever the story was.
that's like Final Fantasy 14's expansion that just happened, right? The Dawn Trail.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
MMOs are the most clean example of a live
Yes.
service,
Yeah.
right? It's very structured. I could tell you what the next the next patch is going to be like.
Yeah.
That being said, so we see Joe mentioned something that I think is pivotal to this conversation. As a gamer or as a consumer, when I hear about the industry coming out with more offline focused games, don't get me wrong, I like playing with friends, right? But when I hear about that, it makes me happy. It makes me feel like, yes, because I know that they almost have to focus more on the quality of the game
Hmm.
than if I hear something's going to come out as a live service game. Because the core definition and focus, I'm a developer by trade. So I know that when you're making a live service game, you have to think about how can I make this game monetarily productive, right?
Viable.
And how long can I get it so that people pay attention to it long enough to make a ton of money, right? It's about keeping retention, and if not retention, increasing over time your player base, which is really hard. So retention's like a little bit easier. How can I keep these players playing my game for as long as humanly possible, because that equates to profits. Whereas I feel like when you're told to just make a game, well, how do I make this game as polished as possible? Because I only
Yeah.
get one shot. It's going out and that's it. Maybe I can release a patch if there's a bunch of issues, but that's going to cost me money, right? No matter how long people play it, I'm not making more money once they bought my game. They bought my game. That's it. So my focus is make it worth buying so that the people that do tell all the people that haven't, this game's fantastic. Go out and buy it. Go get Wukong, whatever. When I'm making a live service game, or if I was, I can guarantee several conversations during planning would be, how do we make it so that this always feels fresh? This always feels blah, 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 because the focus is making money.
Roguelite.
don't do that. I don't want to see roguelites coming to the live service genre. Like, could you imagine?
That would be torture on another level. I think the entertainment comparison that you could give would be a full-on blockbuster movie to a TV series.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the quality difference, it's rare that you have a TV series. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does, where the quality and the full-on put together work of a TV series is comparable, if not better, than a movie.
Hmm.
We're
Again, there
gonna
are
get so many
movies.
comments on that. Like, where
Again,
can
I
we
know there's
clip that
movies
part?
that are just like really, really bad, and then there's TV series that are really, really bad. But if you look at, again, you're taking cream of the crop from both. If you look at the difference, even if you take the top of the line, like TV series, and compare it to a movie,
Mm-hmm.
like Lord of the Rings, compared to like TV wise, it's very hard to say that you can make it at the same level as far as how flushed out you can make it.
Hmm.
I
Well,
think with
sustainability is the issue there, which is actually, I didn't get to it, but that 70% of developers are concerned about making games. The key word in the survey was sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that applies to what you're saying and this topic in general. Is if 95% of game studios want to make live service and are making live service games, unfortunately, but 70% of them are scared to do so, why? And I think it harkens back to that mindset. When you're making these games, you need to keep people interested forever and ever and ever.
I think the biggest issue that I feel like a lot of these gaming companies are doing is copying and pasting the exact same game. I mean, we just saw a game where it was cat mechas.
Yeah.
But it was literally copy, paste, Overwatch.
And, this is the game I brought up the other day. I was like, what are you talking? Yeah.
And
I'll try to find the name.
Like, I think it's Nieko.
Yeah, it's something like that with like the...
But they copy and paste the OGs over and over again. And people don't want that. Now, if they gave me a cool story game and were like, okay, you know, here's more story. But it was like, here's a perfect example. Imagine if they did Call of Duty, OG Call of Duty, okay, when the stories were phenomenal. And they had a live service where you got more story from that. That would be entertaining or cool. You still get to fight. It would still have multiplayer. Just take us back to the old games.
Your MMO side is showing.
I know. So well, it's not just MMOs, right? I mean, I play Genshin. I like new maps, new story, but feels fresh. Like when I'm currently doing a review on Genshin Impact's 5.0. When I got to Natlan, I felt like I was in a new game within Genshin Impact. I love when games do that. That's how you prolong things. You bring us a new area, you freshen it up. And a lot of these other games are just recycling the same things, just tweaking a few things, and it's not, I feel like it's not enough, or I don't know.
I was half incentivized to say, well, we shouldn't keep saying the same examples, but I think it goes further to your point, right? It's all of these new games that are coming out. A lot of them are failing or not even making it to production, right? Like Sega had a game similar to Concord that just didn't even release because they're just using the templates of the major hitters. And unfortunately, like we talked about a bit earlier, the market just doesn't care, right? Like it needs to be different from the top 5 to top 10 list. So yeah, are people probably tired about hearing about the top contenders, right? The Genshins, the Fortnites, the Apexes, the Destiny, sure, we're sick of it. I could name a couple war ones. I don't play war games, but like ultimately in every genre, you're going to hear the same 3 titles over and over and over and over.
Well, here's another take, right? Something I was telling you earlier, Maverick. A lot of these live services are changing from free to play to just paid because they know they're not going to get the money that they want from it. Mm-hmm. One of the ones that I cited as an example earlier was the Disney Dreamlight game. Mm-hmm. That's basically like an Animal Crossing type game. They went on when they first came out about how they were going to become free to play. I even told my friend, hey, don't buy it. Wait it out. It's going to be free to play one day. Well, that was like, I don't know, a year and some change ago at this point. It's when the game first came out. And it's not going free to play anymore because they just can't afford to. They lost like a third of their players within the first year because it's just, even though it's a live service thing, it's just not enough to bring people in to keep playing. So
right.
And a lot of the live service games are going just paid now.
Well, there's still live service, a lot of them. Like what you're describing is still a live service game. It's just you're paying up front because mm-hmm. they want to give themselves the insurance that will make at least some of the profit we hope will make up front. And if people don't keep the retention, that's okay. We made our money to begin with. And that wasn't acceptable in the past. If you were going to have a live service style game that wasn't an MMO, right? It had to be free to play because people weren't going to pay for your game and a subscription unless they were people that were willing to play MMOs, in which case they're going to play an MMO, not your game. Mm-hmm. So they had to be a lot of what we talk about gaming, right?
We got here. Fantasy changed that a little bit though. Like, I don't mean to cut you off, but I remember Final Fantasy, you had to buy the game itself and then pay the monthly service.
Yeah, you still.
Right. And that's the traditional MMO paradigm. But the industry moved away from that when they moved away from MMOs. And in part of doing so, it was like this deal, this implicit, unspoken pact that we had with gaming companies. If you're going to release something that I have to pay over time for, you're going to make it free. And that became the norm. But over time, these big companies, they're not very creative. Many more people, as Crystal was talking about, started trying to just copy, copy, copy. Well, now we're sick of it. So we won't, it's not just that we won't buy the game, we won't even play the game. So you don't have any retention. So companies now realize that live service is very dangerous, not just profitable for them. So what can they do? They hedge their bets. They go, okay, now you also have to buy our game. And if you don't play it, well, at least you paid us. Right. So I think live service in general is overall unhealthy for the industry. But I think we're at a healthy point in it in the industry where the consumers are finally starting to wake up and have and set their boundaries.
Yes.
Right. Concord came out, not good enough. It died within 2 weeks. Deservedly so.
Yeah, I'm excited to hopefully bring back in the live service stuff because it's too much. It's too much of the same stuff. I don't know. How do you feel about it, Joe?
Without trying to like double back on conversations we probably beat the horse on repeatedly, and that being like microtransactions and things like that, which stem from that happening. So I think this happening kind of wakes them up and says, well, if we're going to do this, we have to make it worth it. And that's always been the argument of everybody that plays games. It's not that they're doing this, it's that it doesn't feel like it's worth it. You make it worth it, people will pay whatever. That's how it works. Like if you have a product and you can name 1,000,001 examples of it, and you show like, hey, my product is worth buying it, and then repeatedly coming back for upgrades or whatever, depending on like if you're a hobbyist, there's a million different things. You could say like, well, I bought this and then I keep going back for that and this and that. We need gaming communities to kind of shift back over. And then it looks to be happening.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of Gaming at the Round Table with me, Maverick, and JoJo. Bye.
Take care.